Today's episode of Catalyst Controversy, I'm going to be going over what I think are the worst exotic catalysts in the game and what I would do to make them better. Before we get started, just a couple things. No, I do not think that there are any bad catalysts. I upset some of you in my previous video, so let me explain why I think there are no bad catalysts. Because catalysts are modifiers to an exotic, in addition if you will, you cannot judge them based on the base exotic's performance. Since there are exotics I would consider bad, Cerberus Plus One for example, I must look at them in the sense that there are literally no downsides for using any of these catalysts. And since there are no downsides to using these catalysts, I've examined every single catalyst and found all of them at least did something beneficial to the gun. Even if I disagreed on the variation and the values of how good it was to the gun, it still matters. Now, if you compare catalysts to other catalysts, that's where the bad catalyst debate begins, because there are catalysts that are better than others, and there are catalysts that are substantially worse than others. With that being said, I just want to thank the sponsor of today's video. It's you, the viewer. Without you, I wouldn't be making this, so thank you for making this happen. Alright, let's get into this discussion. Last time out, I made a tier list ranking every single exotic catalyst. This is that tier list. I know that Dead Man's Tale is on the list twice. I'm just using this PNG for continuity's sake, so calm down in the comment section, please. The catalysts I consider to need major reworks to get them up to an acceptable level are those in C tier and below, with one notable exception. Cerberus Plus One. Starting off with the only A-tier catalyst I'm going to be talking about in this video, we have Cerberus Plus One. Man, some of y'all were some angry individuals when I said this thing was A-tier. I think it's because of a lack of understanding on how this gun works and how this gun is meant to be played with. And because of that, a lot of you assume that this catalyst is supposed to be bad, but in reality, it's one of the most game-changing catalysts in all of Destiny. Just a quick refresher, Cerberus Plus One catalyst adds the alternate fire mode, allowing it to have the short range, close spread, low firing that is supposed to be the opposite of what its primary fire mode is. A lot of you do not like this catalyst because you think it makes damage worse. Yes, it decreases DPS, but damage overall increases or stays the same when using the gun at optimal ranges. That being said, if you cannot shove this thing directly up someone or something's cooter, you are not going to be doing peak or even close to ideal DPS or damage with the alternate fire mode. That being said, this catalyst does fix the inverse range issue on Cerberus. It's the one thing that makes this catalyst not do well. If you're shooting Cerberus in the range where you could be using the alternate fire mode, you're going to be losing damage because the damage graph is backwards. The closer you are to something with the primary fire mode, the less damage you are going to do. All of this being said, this catalyst needs a complete rework to make the gun usable. Starting off, I'm going to keep the alternate fire mode. I know it's funny, haha, but the gun's strength revolve around throwing a bunch of bullshit downrange very quickly and making it work with flinch and other factors. So we're going to add functionality to both fire modes and enhance both base and alternate fire. The rework would be as follows. I'm going to add two functions. For starters, in regular fire mode, every shot hit overloads one round in the alternate fire mode, stacking up to 31 times, 31 bullets in the magazine, one for every shot in the magazine. These overload rounds grant bonus range and damage similar to Sturm. For the alternate fire mode, every shot hit increases one round into the regular fire mode. These rounds, you guessed it, have increased range and damage just like Sturm and Drank. However, all it takes is stance shifting one gun to make this happen. This change would make the gun essentially a stance switching nightmare to deal with. I'm not a number scientist, so I'm not going to say how much more damage exactly these overload rounds would need to do, so let's just pretend that it's going to be broken for 2 weeks and then fixed as soon as someone more popular than me complained about it per se. The second thing this catalyst would do is grant new functionality to the alternate fire mode. Swapping fire mode shortly after getting a kill causes Cerberus Plus One fire pattern to shoot in one tightly grouped projectile for 5 seconds. I know this change would most likely allow Cerberus to be competitive, since the biggest flaw with the gun is the only thing that makes it unique, but hey, it's the best thing I can come up with. Let me know what you think. I think that it would still be more useful in Crucible, however, it would be just a little bit more bearable. Besides Cerberus Plus One, here are the exotic catalysts I'm going to be quote-unquote fixing in this video. Everything C tier and below, essentially. Let's get it started with Colony. Currently, Colony's catalyst grants increased ammo reserves. Great, we're going to be keeping that on top of that on the following. Every insectoid hitting a target adds a stacking weaken debuff up to 6 stacks. Every stack of insectoid adds 8% weaken up to 40% weaken total. The point of this weapon change is to rotate what the purpose of the gun is used for and gives us another heavy weapon support slot similar to tractor cannon. On one hand, the damage buff is 10% better in PvE activities than tractor cannon. On the other hand, the ammo economy is worse. It's a trade-off teams would need to make. No, would not be stackable with tractor cannon, since in my universe the game is coded properly. These debuffs cannot stack. The stronger one would apply at any given time. Next up is the Crimson Catalyst. Currently, as it stands, it gives plus 20 range. I would add the increased range to plus 28, so the range stat would max out at 100. On top of it, I would add a change to the gun's recoil direction to 100, making the gun more predictably vertical in its application. On top of these, I would add Frenzy. Crimson's job is to keep you in the fight with health regen, and Frenzy would make you able to do this a little bit better with extra damage and extra stats. Simple as, I considered giving Crimson a Rampage, but I think this damage buff would be a little bit too strong, except Frenzy gives Crimson a little bit of everything that it needs compared to Rampage just giving damage. Up next is the Heir Apparant. As it stands, its catalyst does two contradictory things in my opinion. It incentivizes the shield breaking and at the same time increases the shield's capacity. The path I'm going to choose for the sake of balance is to incentivize the gun being used when its shield breaks. Upon the shield breaking, Heir Apparant is reloaded completely from reserves. As it stands, it currently reloads 50% of its reserves from the catalyst. Also, when the shield breaks for a short time, Heir Apparant fires from reserves at an increased rate of fire. This rate of fire increase is going to be double, going from 900 RPM to 1800 RPM, and the buff would last for 4 seconds, depending on how overcharged the shield was before it broke on a scalar level. For example, at 50% capacity, before taking damage and shield breaking, the buff would last for 2 seconds, etc. This is mainly designed to get you out of tough situations and incentivize the gun being fully charged before you walk around a corner blindly into a group of ads. Fast and incentivizes actually the using the shield breaking as a tool to keep the fight going while killing the thing that actually broke the shield quicker. Next up is Lord of Wolves. As it stands, Lord of Wolves Catalyst does two things: increases reload when release the wolves is active and stability when it is not active. This is garbage, and my change, as I said in my initial Catalyst video, would be to flip these values. Extra stability when release the wolves is active and extra reload when it is not active. Since release the wolves is so recoil punishing, this will get the gun back into a little more usable place. However, I still do not think it would be as broken as it used to be back in the good old days of Omnioculus plus Lord of Wolves spam in the Crucible. Up next is Diris. Currently, its catalyst makes the gun in range faster while amplified and allows final blows with Diris to make you amplified. As I discussed already, the increase in range is negligible in almost all situations, and the self-amplification is only useful outside of arc builds. My change is as follows. While amplified, Diris fires faster and moths spawned from loyal moths move faster and deal bonus damage. I'm removing the self-amplification, but in turn, this will make this gun way more usable on arc subclasses by saying, hey, if you can get amplified, somehow this gun is going to cook, it's going to shred. Upside and a downside to this one, since now it doesn't allow for self-amplification outside of an arc subclass. Normally, if you kept this, it would be abused, but otherwise, I like this change. Moving on to Worldline Zero, I'm going to keep the reduction in time to activate Tesseract, but I'm going to add the following. Sprinting allows Tesseract to stack up to a maximum of 3 charges. This gun normally fails because the perk Eager Edge on any legendary sword that has it is a far superior option for quick movement and teleporting than Tesseract already is. So, to make the teleporting mechanic feel exotic, you can either make it far stronger, which I feel would break the game, or you can give it multiple stacks that charge as you're sprinting. I think this change rewards momentum-based gameplay and keeps up the fantasy Worldline Zero has built in for those Guardians who really just want to teleport and pretend that they're playing Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. Now for Tractor Cannon. Currently, it gives a magazine size increase and increased reserves. I'm keeping both of those. It's a good function from the catalysts that support how Tractor is supposed to play. My change to Tractor Cannon is just this. Plus 40 to range. That's it. Nothing crazy. This simply adds a couple extra meters and lets you debuff bosses a little safer. This isn't too crazy. It's just enough so that Tractor Cannon Catalyst can keep up and actually beat the fraud allegations, because this gun is mandatory in most endgame content, and its Catalyst should be able to beat the fraud allegations also. Up next is the Verglas Curve Catalyst. Currently grants Shiver Quiver, which is basically an advanced archer's tempo. My addition to this catalyst is going to be something that synergizes well with stasis. What we are going to do is give this catalyst a built-in Whisper of Fissure, the same buff percents that apply to Whisper of Fissures currently, and is stackable with the Verglas Curve catalyst by default. Only thing is, it's going to be stackable with Whisper of Fissures. I'm not going to go into the math behind this, but let's just say at max effectiveness, meaning at the center of the stasis explosion, running the Verglas Curve catalyst plus Whisper of Fissures on the stasis subclass, it's going to do around 30% more damage compared to just running Whisper of Fissures with no catalyst alone. It's the best I can do, since damage testing with this gun feels almost impossible sometimes. Same thing with trying to damage test with stasis explosions. It's just crazy. Moving on to Dead Messenger. As I said before, this gun really doesn't have a catalyst anymore because it's craftable now. So it has 3 catalysts, technically. There's no real way to fix this, so I'm just going to be making its catalyst a new perk. It's going to combine the Demolitionist, Thresh, and Unrelenting, because currently for its catalyst, quote-unquote, slot, you get to choose between Demolitionist, Thresh, or Unrelenting. I feel like this would be crazy strong. It would be a super good perk. It gives you everything. Grenade energy, super energy. It gives you health regen when you're killing stuff. I think that this would be phenomenal and actually make the gun feel exotic and allow it to compete with other wave frame grenade launchers such as Forbearance, which is just the best in the entire game right now. Delicate Tomb's up next. As it stands, currently its catalyst, collecting an ionic trace, reloads this gun from reserves. I'm going to add on to this. Collecting an ionic trace overloads this weapon from reserves. Every overload shot has increased damage and a faster rate of fire. This change just adds on to the current catalyst, but wouldn't make it too strong, especially in Crucible. I think the usefulness would be limited because of the ammo economy issues. It's just strong enough to allow for chain kills and gives you that little bit of extra leniency to make this gun less punishing for missing one of the fusion rifle bolts, which you normally will because of its unpredictable spread pattern. Moving on to MIDA Multi-Tool Catalyst. As it currently stands, this catalyst grants no distractions. I'm already on record as saying that I don't like this because its effects really aren't practical or noticeable, so what we're going to do is this. We're going to add a new function to the catalyst. We're going to remove no distractions, and what it is going to do now is this. Landing precision hits grants a stacking stability and damage bonus. Stacks 4 times up to 6 seconds. Before you freak out, this damage is never going to be enough to 3-tap headshots most Guardians in Crucible unless they are intentionally running minimum resilience. This damage is going to max out at 64 per headshot, and a maxed access will simply let the gun have a better confirm and cleanup potential. It won't affect the gun's time to kill unless you're doing some funky stuff with body shots, but simply increasing the damage to a maximum of 64 per headshot at max stacks is going to let you be a tiny bit more competitive in team shot scenarios, or being able to finish off people more easily that have taken at least one hit from somebody else on the map. Now for SUROS Regime. I actually like the catalyst, I just don't think that its effects are measurable. As it currently stands, it increases health regen and changes the recoil direction to 100. It's good, but it's really hard to measure because the gun is already buttery smooth and the health regen feels kind of inconsistent at times. So we're going to add a little spice to this catalyst. We're going to add +6 to the magazine, increasing its capacity from 36 to 42. Wait for it. We're also going to add Feeding Frenzy. The point is this thing is just going to be able to shit out bullets, and a bigger reload and a bigger magazine is just going to let us get this done much better. It'll help out both the fast firing mode and the slow firing mode, and I think will make for a marginally better weapon. Moving on to Sunshot, I'm going to add Rampage. I don't know why, but I think this would be great for the gun. As it stands, it's currently only really used for ad clear, and that little bit of extra damage shouldn't push it over the edge and make it too much better. I think what it would do is turn this gun into sort of a midnight cool mainstay workhorse hand cannon. I would be excited to see a built-in damage buff, maybe a damage buff such as Path of Burning Steps, just added to Sunshot by itself. You know, getting kills with the soul explosion increases damage, but I think Rampage would be a little bit more consistent otherwise, so that's why I say Rampage. Now for another controversial one, Monte Carlo. I know a lot of you were thinking when I rated this C tier in the first video. Let me explain. My biggest issue with this catalyst is, for starters, it doesn't function as a glaive. It's a bayonet. Its catalyst is designed to be used as such. A high damage one-shot that puts you directly in the line of danger. It has limited usefulness in endgame content, considering that most enemies aren't going to get one shot by this. The enemies that are actually a threat enough to justify using Monte Carlo on them. My rework to this catalyst will be as follows. Getting a kill with the bayonet melee rewards an overshield and immediately starts health regeneration. This change, I think, would fix my biggest complaint about the catalyst. I don't know how strong the overshield would have to be, but immediately increasing and starting health regeneration would solve this thing's issues of having to put yourself in incredibly dangerous circumstances just to nuke one thing. Next up is Prometheus Lens. I'm going to be honest with y'all, I struggled to think of what I could do to rework this catalyst that plays into the gun's biggest strength or fixes its most glaring weakness, and I've come up with one thing, and it's just Frenzy. I don't know why. I think this would be crazy good. I think it would be really good. This gun is designed to just hold the trigger down and be in combat the entire time, so the extra stats from Frenzy would just make for more better, essentially. Up next is Ruinous Effigy. The only thing I would change is make this catalyst to allow for a stronger form of weaken to apply to enemies by the gun's orb detonation. The weaken would be 40% on the same level as the change I would make to Colony, just a little bit better than the tractor cannon. This would allow this gun to be used as a solid support weapon and increase usage in endgame content dramatically wherever there is a boss that needs to be melted. This catalyst's biggest problem as it stands is that the damage increase doesn't apply to anybody else. If you hit somebody with the orb, the only way you're going to be getting more damage is if you're hitting it with your own Ruinous Effigy. Moving on to the D tier weapons and truly bad catalysts, we're starting off with Black Talon. This thing needs a total rework starting from the ground up, so we're adding utility as follows. Hitting an opponent multiple times extends the damage and explosion radius of Crow's wings. The damage, I think, would have to scale between 25 to 50% per stack up to 5 stacks, similar to Whirlwind Blade, and the explosion from Crow's wings would grow up to 2 extra meters, up to 5 stacks. Basically, it's a better Whirlwind Blade, except its damage is applied only to the heavy, not to light attack chaining. Along with this, I would increase its ammo capacity. I'm not even convinced that this would make Black Talon much better or even usable, since it suffers from the fact that Black Talon is just a bad caster frame sword that eats your exotic slot and really doesn't do anything special besides that. Alright, moving on to Borealis Catalyst. It basically doesn't have one right now. I know it technically does, but the stats added do not matter for the function of this weapon, so what we're going to do is give it a better version of Elemental Capacitor. For starters, it already has regular Elemental Capacitor, but each element is going to have an added function. For Solar, it would have Incandescent. For Void, it would apply Weaken. For Arc, it would get Jolt Shot. I didn't really struggle when thinking a way to make this work with the existing Destiny kit. I just don't think that Borealis is salvageable without a full rework to the gun, because in the current meta, it does not have any purpose besides being a funny, haha, I just killed you when you're super and now I'm going to one-shot body shot a member of your team. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Moving on to a gun that I think is actually salvageable is DARCI. What you do is you take its catalyst and you give it a form of whisper breathing. Call it something silly like computer breathing or DARCI breathing, but just give this weapon a little bit more damage via catalyst to bring it in line with the least whisper of the worm. Up next is the hard light catalyst, which puts its stability to max. I would say keep the stability. In my opinion, I don't think it helps for mouse and keyboard players, but for some console players, the difference is noticeable. But for its catalyst, I would give hard light a little something new. We're adding to its catalyst a perk that you're not going to be surprised to hear on my end. It's Rampage. Simple as a little bit of extra damage, really never hurt anybody, especially on auto rifles of this nature. I think it would bring it into line and make it a slightly more competitive option if it had Rampage. Up next is Skyburners Disappointment. For its catalyst, I'm going to add one simple thing. As it currently stands, the catalyst grants only reload speed, it used to grant range, but for the big change, I'm going to keep the reload speed since I think it's of no consequence to the performance of this gun, and I'm going to be adding Incandescent. I don't think it would make the gun too strong, but I think it would improve it a lot in PvE and make it a more usable option when dealing with any Cabal enemies. Moving on to a catalyst that I think would be really funny to see happen is Sweet Business. I'm giving this thing killing tally. I do not care one bit. I think it would be crazy strong and destroy endgame balance, but just like Velo and Predator, I'm a man on a mission. Destroy balance. If everything is broken, then nothing is broken. Last but not least, Jade Rabbit. I think this is my least favorite catalyst in the game for one reason and one reason alone. It's completely unnecessary for the gun to be operational. What I'm going to be doing is this, removing the stability from Jade Rabbit's catalyst and adding those stats to handling. I'm giving it plus 39 handling, strange number, but it currently has 21, and adding 39 more handling would bring it up to 60 handling. I think this would be a great change because Jade Catalyst's biggest downside is the gun is extraordinarily clunky, and I feel that this change to handling would just make it more useful in all scenarios and make it feel much better to play with. Alright, that's it, fellas. I currently have nothing more in this script to say. As you can see right here, I just said make up some stuff. I don't know, I just don't want to script anymore. So what I'm going to say is this. In this video, I talked about what I thought were the worst catalysts in the game. I still stand by what I said. There are no bad catalysts because nothing ever negatively impacts a gun's performance. When I was writing this, I thought of some changes that had upside and downside, but there are some guns whose catalysts you can't remove, meaning it wouldn't be optional. Most notably, the Year 1 weapons. You have to use the catalyst, so I had to have a little bit more finesse when talking about the Year 1 weapons because the fact that you can't remove them. But I would love to hear what y'all have to say about any of these changes, maybe changes that you would make. I know a lot of you were very vocal about Cerberus Plus One and Monte Carlo specifically, and a lot of you were mad at the fact that I said that there was no such thing as a bad catalyst. I hope I explained it just a little bit better for some of you who sit in the back of the classroom, but hey, it's just what it is. This is my job, this is what I do. So I want to thank each and every single one of you for watching up to this point. If you made it to this point, let me know in the comments what you think, what I should do next, and that's pretty much it. See you next time.